Welcome to Codex. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we are talking about Chapter 29 in the Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent. And this chapter is titled, And the Cycle Continues. And it's talking about the next generation of consoles after the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn and also the Nintendo 64. So we're moving past that now, and it's all about the hype machine. And so Tyler is going to talk about Sega's next console.
Yeah, so we're moving into the, this is a period in my life where I truly recognized the next generation of consoles. I remember referring to, with me and my little brother would always talk about like the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2 and like that whole era of consoles as next gen consoles, even though I still think of them as that, even though we're like 3 generations out now after that. So the end of the Sega Saturn here. So just as the executive vice president of marketing and sales at Nintendo, Peter Main predicted, the success of the Nintendo 64 was entirely at Sega's expense. So Sega had goofed in the 32-bit era. So they had low sales with the Saturn already, and those were cut further in half by the Nintendo 64. Bernie Stolar, who is the president and CEO of Sega of America, decided to stop all advertisements for the Sega Saturn and release the last 3 games for the console. These 3 games were House of the Dead, Shining Force 3, and my personal favorite as of this afternoon, Burning Rangers.
I am so stoked about this. We're gonna
my gosh.
I'm going to play the soundtrack right now, but essentially Tyler texts me going, we have to play the soundtrack for Burning Rangers, and I'm about to buy a Sega Saturn to play this game.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. I was doing some YouTube research on it, and it's so the general premise is you're in the future where the only remaining danger to anybody in the world is fire. So apparently fire just is always a danger, and so you're like this super futuristic firefighter, basically, who has to go in and rescue people. The game was made by Sonic Team. It was their last game for the Sega Saturn. The reason they made a game about firefighters was because they wanted to finally make a game where you weren't like killing people or harming people, you were just saving people.
I like
so
that.
you go in there, and the only things that you shoot at that are like the enemies are just robots, which, as we all know, it's totally okay to kill as many robots as possible. No moral quandaries there, right?
Robots have no feelings. Everyone knows that.
That's right. As you can probably hear right now, the Burning Rangers theme song is peak 90s theme song. Like, this is like some real anime awesomeness. It reminds me, like the electric guitars in there reminds me of the show SWAT Cats. Did you ever watch SWAT Cats?
I never watched SWAT Cats, but just that name alone makes me super happy.
Yeah, that was I'm pretty sure it was an American TV show, but it was like a super 90s like extreme cats that, I don't know, they built a jet in there. They lived in a junkyard, they built a jet. Anyway, you should look that one up after this show, because that's also a great theme song.
All of it on DVD after I push stop on the recorder. I'm going to ignore talking to you. I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to buy it.
We're going to buy some SWAT Cats. Man,
Cats.
That was a great show. The Radical Squadron.
I will say, I feel like Burning Rangers is a series that we need rebooted.
Oh, man.
Today.
I would play an HD remake of Burning Rangers in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah. Even like they could do like an HD remake of it and everyone would be like, oh, this is awesome. And then they could be like, hey, straight up sequel time. Here we go. For AAA titles.
With a sweet new theme song.
Because Sega. Oh, yeah. Like just do like some sort of dubstep version of that, for the time change.
Uh-huh. Yeah, gotta keep it contemporary.
They could totally do that. But I think, because Sega pretty much just publishes games now anyway, right? So
yeah.
You gotta think they got some sort of Burning Rangers thing in the works.
Yeah, I would hope so, but it's been 20 years, so maybe not. So anyway, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Burning Rangers tangent.
Yeah. The Saturn's failure was extremely damaging for Sega. So they sold 2 million Saturns in the US, which by comparison, Sony shipped, which is, pretty high. 10.75 million PlayStations. It's also important to note that while Saturn and Nintendo release sales figures, Sony does shipped sales figures.
Yeah, so. I didn't know that, but it actually told us that in the book right after we finished those 3 episodes on the top selling games for those 3 consoles. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Good to know.
It's still a good metric because like they don't just like ship consoles that aren't selling,
Yeah, that's
true.
But
it is slightly like if those numbers were much closer together, if like Sega had sold 10 million Saturns and Sony shipped 10.75 million, you'd be going, that's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, I think
but because
also
the number's so big, you can say Sony definitely blew them out of the water.
Yeah, and it's also got to just be easier for Sony. Like, there's no middleman. We don't have to check back in with the retailers that are selling our consoles. We just know we ship this many. We're just going to end it there.
Yeah. So at the end of this, basically what happened was Sega absorbed a $450 million loss in 1998.
Yikes.
The reason the Saturn was so damaging for Sega is, and we've talked about this before, is because they had released the 32X like 6 months before the Saturn came out. People were feeling pretty burned by Sega at this point. And the games, at least in the United States, the Sega Saturn games were very Japanese focused. Like there weren't a whole lot of games that were like sort of targeted towards American audiences. And so that didn't help their sales in the United States either. So people were feeling burned by Sega, by the 32X and then the Saturn. But
should call the Burning Rangers.
Yeah, they were feeling the Burning Rangers, which sounds like a completely different thing now.
oh boy. Clean podcast. Moving on.
But while all of this was happening, just because people were feeling burned by Sega doesn't mean that the rumor mill wasn't open for business.
Oh, that rumor mill's running 24/7.
Oh man, and Burning Rangers released 9 months before the Dreamcast did. But anyway, many thought the Saturn was actually made simultaneously with Sega's next console, and they weren't that far off. Sega completed the design for the Duro, which is named after the metallic female fighter in Virtua Fighter, or the Katana, which is the Japanese sword. So they had kind of two code names, and I think those two code names were, one was for the home console, and the other was for the arcade version. But with those code names combined, we would learn the name of Sega's next console was the Dreamcast.
Oh, I gotta say, easily top 10 names of a console.
Oh,
the Dreamcast might even be top 3. I'd say the Dreamcast. What a great name for a system.
Yeah, unlike the Sonys and the Microsofts of the world who just kind of keep the same name but just throw some numbers on the end.
Yeah,
Nintendo and Sega, they really change it up every time. There's no like Super Nintendo 2. It was the Ultra 64, the GameCube, right? Like all these systems had different names because they were separate brands. But on May 21st in 1998, Sega announced the Dreamcast by its official name. The 128-bit console sported a Hitachi SH4 CPU and an NEC/Videologic PowerVR 3D graphics chip. PowerVR is a brand that you will still recognize today. They make a lot of graphics chips for smartphones. Some of the earlier iPhones before Apple started making their own chips ran on PowerVR graphics chips, and a lot of Android devices still run on PowerVR graphics chips.
I just want to let the audience know that that's not written in our notes at all. That's just straight off of Tyler's dome, and that's how good of a co-host he is at this podcast.
So PowerVR makes a lot of they're not like a really like sexy brand of video chipsets like ATI or AMD. Sorry, ATI, that's showing my age. AMD or NVIDIA, but they definitely they make a lot. They maybe sell more than those two. That I'm just speculating. But
by the way, I love you saying ATI. That's showing my age, and like none of this stuff is really that old when you think about it.
That's true. Yeah, but I still think of those AMD. I still think of the Radeon as an ATI product. Anyway. There was a Yamaha stereo chip and 2 different operating systems. There was the one made by Sega, which most games used, and then there was one made by Microsoft, which as far as I can tell was only in there just to put on the front of the Dreamcast to say powered by Windows CE. I don't think any games actually used Windows CE.
I was wondering about that because we're going to get to that in like 2 seconds, but they're going to have a broadband modem essentially on a 56K modem on this. Was their whole idea that they wanted to have an internet browser? Is that why they had Windows on it?
And actually, the internet browser might be the only thing that runs on Windows CE. That's speculation from me, but it did come with a web browser.
I do want to jump way more into this at some point when we go off book, because again, they're brushing over the specs, but I really want to know how different the Dreamcast was from the PlayStation 2, because we're going to talk about how vastly different it was, but I want more specs. I want more numbers.
Yeah.
You know?
And at this point in the game, the whole like bits arms race is starting to become a little bit less accurate. Like I guess like this is technically a 128-bit system, and like the PlayStation 2 would technically be a 128-bit system, but like the original Xbox 32-bit, like if you want to talk what actual numbers they are. But so like at this point it's starting to not matter, and that's why they stopped advertising it, because it just wasn't very accurate anymore of like being a representation of the power of a system.
Yeah, when you think about it now, no one really even talks about what kind of processor is in like an Xbox One versus
That's because
a PlayStation 3.
the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 have basically the same processor. Like they're very similar. They're both made by AMD. Both of them run on AMD graphics chipsets, and they're both very, very similar. They have some minor differences, but and even then those are not that different from standard PCs anymore too. So we could do a whole episode on my speculations as to the future of console gaming. But
we might have to do it when we catch all up.
That's right. We may have to do that. The Dreamcast also used a new technology called the GD-ROM, which is like a CD-ROM, but for games. Actually, the G stood for gigabyte disk. So it was the gigabyte disk ROM. So they held about a gigabyte. For reference, a standard CD holds between 650 and 700 megabytes, depending on what kind of CD you have. So they held a lot of data compared to like the PlayStation, but not a lot of data compared to the PlayStation 2, which is part of the reason why the Dreamcast did not do so well against the PlayStation 2. But one of the very interesting things that the Dreamcast had was it included a 56K modem, which allowed it to connect to the internet. Sega would actually start up their own internet service provider, and they would include, if you signed up for like a 2-year contract with SegaNet, they would send you a Dreamcast for free. And then you would pay your monthly dial-up fee to log into SegaNet so you could play your games online. It was pretty sweet. They did add broadband support later on, but you had to buy a separate device for that. And not very many people bought it because by the time the Dreamcast had discontinued in 2002, I want to say, or 2001, there weren't that many people on broadband. So if you want to get a broadband adapter for your Dreamcast now, you got to hit up eBay, and it's like $100. They're like really expensive compared to like other accessories of the time, because they just didn't make very many of them, and they're actually still pretty useful if you wanted to play games online. That's the best way to do it because nobody has a phone line anymore or a dial-up ISP to dial in. All of these things would be released in Japan on November 27th, 1998. Sega thought the speed at which their new console was released would bring them back into the race. They were like, we're getting ahead of the game. Let's just forget all this Saturn 32X stuff. Let's start fresh. We're going to launch before everybody else, and we're going to win because of it. Well, a challenger approaches.
Ooh, okay. So Sony decided to have a press conference on March 2nd, 1999 at the Tokyo Opera House. They're like, we're doing our own event, okay? And it's important to note this is less than 6 months after the release of the Japanese release of the Dreamcast, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But this is, however, before the September 9th, 1999 release of the Dreamcast in North America. So it's kind of like...
$99.99.
Yeah, that's right. $99.99 for $199. Just split right down the middle. So Sony decided to announce first how the original PlayStation completely blew away their expectations. Like Sony was the PlayStation was the biggest product for Sony in the 1990s, with over 50 million units shipped worldwide. So the PlayStation itself actually accounted for 40% of the entire revenue for Sony. So they were thinking they're just making this game console, when in reality it became a major part of the business. And so while the president of Sony Computer Entertainment, Tsuruhisa Tokunaga, spoke about how part of their success has come from the speed at which they can ship out consoles. Again, throwing out that $50 million consoles shipped number, big, like worldwide. So
50 million, no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. Like that was the announcement that came from the president. Like, hey, this is how we're so good at doing what we do. The big announcement, though, of that show, this was way overshadowed by when the original designer of the PlayStation 1 and now executive at Sony, Ken Kutaragi, came out, and he described the PlayStation 2. And it had quickly become apparent that they had created essentially a supercomputer for the time. So while the Sega Dreamcast could render 3 million polygons per second, the PlayStation 2, as it was now known, it was announced here that was the name of it, could render 60 million raw polygons per second. But when you added like curved surfaces, fogging, and shading, it really did about 16 million, which is still way more than the Dreamcast. So
that's crazy compared to the Dreamcast.
Yeah, it's bananas. So actually, and there was a fun snippet in the book about this. George Lucas actually described the PlayStation 2 as being so powerful, it had more on-the-fly rendering power than all the computers he used on Star Wars Episode 1. Just one PlayStation 2 was better than all the computers he used to design the graphics on Star Wars Episode 1, which I thought was a really weird like tidbit they threw in there, and also where did they interview George Lucas about the PlayStation 2? I want to know more about that.
George Lucas, what do you think about the PlayStation 2? He's like, I'm here to talk about episode 1. I don't.
Yeah.
What? Sure. Sounds fun.
You guys don't want to talk about the Trade Federation? You just want to talk about PlayStation 2? Okay, sounds good. Another feature announced during the PlayStation press conference was all of the original PlayStation's games would be backwards compatible on a PlayStation 2. And so this is huge because now the PlayStation 2 would come out and it had games already. It had the entire library of PlayStation 1.
This is the most important thing for a console. You got to have games.
You got to have games.
Did it have Jaybird?
I mean, it did not have Jaybird, I don't think, which is a big it's a flaw. You know, we all know
for sure.
Every time a console is released without Jaybird, it is a major flaw.
Uh-huh.
Which is why the Myler console, that's Tyler and I's console we're creating, will only have Jaybird on it exclusively. It will have top graphic specs, and the only game available will be Jaybird. So
yeah, Tournament Edition.
Tournament of Champions, the Jaybird Tournament of Champions. So over the course of the next couple months, Sony would release more and more information about the PlayStation 2, and they would pretty much confirm the fact that with PlayStation 2, they're not just going for a game system. This is all about entertainment. So it would play DVDs for the first time. You could play movies.
It was the cheapest DVD player. Like if you were in the market for a DVD player in the year 2000, you like the one to get was PlayStation 2. It was cheaper than an actual DVD player and to play video games.
And that's definitely going to come back at the end of this episode to kind of tell you like how sales went for them. Like this whole entertainment thing they were going for, which I mean, now it's assumed that you buy a console and it can play a DVD. Like if you get a PlayStation or an Xbox, you got a Blu-ray player. Congrats. Like that's what it is.
Yep.
And this is when it all started. So, and then on November 27th, 1998 in Japan, the Dreamcast is released finally. So we're going back a little bit from the PlayStation press conference. So while the system sold out, it was still considered a very quiet release because Sega only shipped 150,000 consoles and 4 games. That's the only stuff that came out for the Dreamcast when it was released in Japan. And only one of those games, Virtua Fighter 3 TB, sold at 1-to-1 ratio with the consoles. The other 3 games
who bought a Dreamcast bought Virtua Fighter?
Yeah, essentially, because it was a very popular arcade title. Again, the whole arcade titles coming over to home consoles. It was still going on with Sega at this time. I feel like a lot of Sega's games were arcade games, so they just brought them over. The low consoles shipped, like that number was caused by a shortage of graphics cards. So former president and CEO of Sega Enterprises, Shoichiro Iramajiri, thought if it weren't for the graphics problem, they would have sold possibly 200,000 to 300,000 more consoles at launch because they just didn't have the cards to produce the systems, which is a huge bummer for Sega because it's going to all come back to bite them. I mean, I feel like a lot of people know how history went with them. So the goal for Sega was to sell more than 1 million consoles by February 1999. And they wanted to sell that many to flood the market and essentially be able to compete with the PS2. Like we already have the market. We have people that bought our consoles, right? But Iramajiri did not hit that goal, and he sold under 900,000 by that time. So in the U.S., meanwhile, Bernie Stolar did not want to make the same mistakes as the Japanese launch. He saw that. He's like, okay, we're going to have 15 games at launch. That was his goal. And to do this, Stolar actually worked very closely with Midway Games. He's like, I want to have you guys have a lot of the games when we come out. And they worked together on it, and which was really good because the American launch of the Dreamcast happened on September 9th, 1999, and the console sold for $199. Like we said before, all about alliteration, Sega. $99.99 for $199. That was their big thing. The problem was, before this release, Stolar was fired from Sega. And so the release that Stolar had planned was essentially given to a former Reebok executive named Peter Moore, and he joined the company as the senior VP of marketing. So now he's in charge of this. And it's very important to note, the American launch of the Sega Dreamcast was way better than the Japanese launch. Okay, mostly because they were 10 months apart, and by that time the Dreamcast had enough US developers that they actually made some really good games for the system to come out on release. So those games included Sega Sports NFL 2K, the boxing game Ready to Rumble, which I actually have played and I really like that game a lot. And then the first iteration of the first home console version of the arcade fighting hit Soul Calibur came out on the American version of Sega Dreamcast. So all in all, Sega sold all 1 million consoles they shipped to the US. But again, they had a hiccup. It wasn't graphics cards this time. It was actually a glitch in some of those Midway titles that caused the music to skip.
Oh no.
So yeah, that was it definitely tainted the record of them coming out. So they sold all this stuff and then they had to do this giant fix that cost a bunch of money.
Was it a hardware problem with the actual console, or was it like the bug in the discs?
It was a bug in the discs itself.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, it's a bummer because the thing with Midway worked. They had 4 titles that came out at launch. So they hit that mark they were going for to have enough games to come out, but everyone has a little glitch, everyone has a little hiccup. So do you want to talk about what's going on with Nintendo, Tyler? Because we got to mention them, obviously.
So Nintendo's not doing nothing during this time. They're still riding high on the success of the Nintendo 64. Even though they have been beat by the PlayStation, they still did very well for themselves. They did not want to be outdone in the marketing hype, so Nintendo finally gave some small details about their next console, codenamed Dolphin, which you may recognize is the name of an emulator for this console. The open source emulator Dolphin is for the GameCube. In fact, the only thing they told people was that the processing chip was called Gecko and that it was designed by IBM. So Howard Lincoln said that the new console would have a DVD drive, but would not confirm or deny the fact that it would play movies. And then they gave a very, very vague launch date of like the year 2000, which wasn't even accurate at all. Okay, so while Nintendo is keeping the Dolphin under wraps, there's something happening with another magical IP sweeping the world right now. That IP, of course, is topically relevant today. Pokemon. So
Pokemon.
Gotta catch them all. So we don't want to go into too much detail because I think we want to do like a full episode on Pokemon, and really to do the subject justice, we gotta kind of make a separate thing. But there is a reason this is really important, and it's because in between console generations, companies usually have a slump in sales. Pokemon made it so that this did not happen to Nintendo in 1999. So Pokemon Red and Blue came out, and at the same time as the Game Boy Color, which was not a brand new Game Boy system. It was like an enhanced Game Boy, basically, that had a color screen and it's like slightly higher specs. But Pokemon Red and Blue would make that thing sell like hotcakes, like gangbusters.
Bananas.
Bananas, which sell very well. So
Banana
anyway,
business is great. Just like the Game Boy Color business was.
Just like the
1999.
hotcakes and gangbuster business. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be making a podcast. We should be selling gangbusters.
That's true. I mean, they sell. They just always sell.
They just do.
I also want to mention that I definitely had a Game Boy Color, not to brag, and I had Pokemon Red, and that changed the game for me 100%. Mm-hmm. Because the big thing about this, I forgot to write this in the notes, but what made the Game Boy Color excel too over all the other handhelds at the time, because I think the Neo Geo Pocket was out then and other stuff like that.
Maybe the Wonder Swan at this time too.
Yeah, I think the Wonder Swan was out at this time. That's right. Yeah, that was the one that was made by the guy who was killed in the car accident, right? That we mentioned.
Yeah, because he worked on the Game Boy also.
Yeah,
right?
he actually was the original designer of the game. Yeah, Gunpei Yokoi. Yeah, so he originally designed the Game Boy, but the Game Boy Color ran for 12 hours on 2 AA batteries.
That's nuts.
Which is what was crazy about it. Because I remember having this game in the car on road trips and just being like, wow, like 7 hours, no problem. I could play this game for 7 hours. I would have a huge headache, but I would do it, because you're a kid and you can't stop. And
I like how it had really no like indicator for what charge level the batteries were at too. Like you kind of had that power light, which would sort of get dimmer as you got to the end. But like it was just like you would just play, and if you weren't really keeping track in your head, your Game Boy would just shut off. Yeah,
it would just turn off, and it would do the whole like pixelated line screen. I remember that.
Yeah,
That's how
and then
you
turn it back on, and you were like, I could definitely get another 10 minutes out, and then it would just keep turning off on you, and you just get progressively madder and madder.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one thing about Game Boy Color that it did not have was a backlit screen. I remember that for sure. You couldn't really, you had to have light facing right at it. You couldn't play it at night. So, which I mean, now is not really a problem, but then that's also, you couldn't really see the colors unless that screen was like in light. You couldn't really tell the difference.
Yeah.
So, okay. Anyway, back to Sony. So, to get people hyped for for the PlayStation 2, they staged a little trade show called PlayStation Festival 2000.
Oh, man. Back when everything was something 2000, you were like, oh, my God, that means the future.
Yeah, they were going to go with PlayStation Festival Y2K, but it felt a little on the nose. So here, they showed off a lot of games for the PlayStation 2, and there were 19 games on display at a show, which to me, when I read it, I'm like, that's pretty good. But apparently, to the people at the show, they were very unimpressed with 19 games, which I thought was interesting. This show was kind of a dud for Sony, and the main reason it was a dud is there was a big piece of hot gossip going around that the PlayStation 2 was extremely hard to design for. If you were a game developer, it was very hard to design games for the PlayStation 2. And this started with Shinji Mikami, the Capcom designer who made Resident Evil and he made Dino Crisis. So this guy knows what he's doing. All right, he's making all sorts of great games. And he said Sony did not provide sufficient tools to design the PlayStation 2. He said the PlayStation 2's most difficult system he had ever worked with, which is some pretty strong words, if you ask me.
Did he work on Resident Evil on the Saturn as well? Because that's pretty strong words if it was worse than the Saturn.
Yeah, because he designed. It's said in the book he designed games for the Saturn and like all those consoles, which I thought was pretty nuts. I also realize now that I have a quote in here I wanted to read, and I 100% put it on the wrong page. So I got to find it real quick. Yeah, I thought it was on this page, and it definitely is. Nope, I found it. Never mind. Oh, gosh. Okay.
Great.
You ready?
Nice stalling while you found it.
Yeah, you did a great job. Thank you, Tyler. This is from Shinji Mikami, and he said, quote, Sony provided an extensive library with PlayStation. The library would do a lot of the work, but with PlayStation 2, there is no library. We needed to create our own library, which poses its own set of problems in that there are so many choices to achieve the same effects. So essentially, I didn't realize how much console manufacturers give a lot of info to these developers to design games in their system. And apparently with the PlayStation 2, it was just overlooked. So this rumor went around the whole festival, and then it became very apparent that they're like, oh, PlayStation, I'm guessing it's like, they don't care about designers or anything like that. So it just flew off the handle, if you would say. But
that's a great way to have no games.
I know, right? To have no one want to design for your system. So while these rumors flew at the festival, there were still some good games shown there. A popular title was Onimusha Warlords, which I actually remember watching a demo for this game at this time. And it was shown by Keiji Inafune, and he designed Mega Man. So this guy, he knew what he was doing. And this game had some very incredible gameplay graphics for the time, and people were pretty much blown away by it. It looked really good. So that game was really popular. But the biggest game is something that it stole Tyler's heart, probably. Metal Gear Solid 2.
Oh, not this video specifically, because I didn't really know about Metal Gear Solid until the mid-2000s. But
it steals your heart now.
Too. It sure does.
So what happened was they did a cinematic video for this on the PlayStation, and it was gorgeous. And everyone was losing their mind over it. But the funny part about the video was Hideo Kojima, who was the designer of the video, he wasn't happy with it. He thought it could have been better, even as people were losing their mind over his gameplay. Yeah, he just was it could be so much better. But it turned out really well. So that hyped up PlayStation a bit. Now, the PlayStation 2 launched, and the Japanese launch of the console was on Sunday, March 4th, 2000. And it was a pretty big deal. Newsweek ran a cover story on the PlayStation 2. Yeah, it was here comes the next high-tech thing, all right? It's going to blow your mind. It's the iPhone before iPhone, essentially. So Sony promised to ship 1 million consoles at launch. There was a rumor in the book that this third-party person was oh, they said 2 million. And then Sony very much backpedaled on that very quickly. They're no, don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So in reality, while the release was a very orderly affair where all the consoles were essentially pre-sold and handed out at 7 a.m. so as not to mess with traffic, they wanted to do it really early, Sony only handed out 600,000 consoles they had shipped. That's all they shipped. So they didn't even hit that million goal on the first day like they wanted to. Because again, supply, they did not have enough consoles manufactured by that date. So although they even said they could have sold 2 to 3 times as many, I think it just was all slowed down with manufacturing. Again, just like the Dreamcast. Like, it seems to be a big problem with these releases. I don't even know if it's a problem anymore. I feel like they manufacture a ton of consoles when they launch now.
I seem to remember with pretty much with every big console launch, there is usually like at least a few weeks where they're kind of hard to get. I do remember when the PlayStation 2 launched, like it just being impossible to get just totally blew my mind. Of being like, what, you could go to the store and they just wouldn't have it? And like you wouldn't be, there's no stores that had it? Like it was crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. The best part was there's a lot of high-profile news stories that came out about the Japanese launch of the PS2. One, including a boy who was robbed of his PS2 while he was on his bike, like a Wild West robbery. Yeah, like some kids just took the bag right off his back. Another was a teenager who tried to commit suicide by jumping out of a window because he couldn't get a PlayStation 2. As far as I know, he lived, though. It was good. So, yeah. But the best conspiracy theory I read was that the Japanese government discovered the PS2 was so powerful it could control guided missiles, and therefore the Japanese government had to limit its release. That's definitely why.
Yeah, I do know there's some extremely weird stuff about the PlayStation 2 and its like capabilities as a computer because for one, it was so powerful or it was perceived to be so powerful that it could do all of these crazy things if you wanted it to. But then there was also like Sony would kind of play up the fact that it was a computer in order to get around certain like tariffs into different countries. So like if you shipped a PlayStation to like some countries, they would like put a tax on it because they'd be like, it's an entertainment thing, it's a whatever. So what Sony would do is they released this system to install Linux on the PlayStation 2 and basically make it into like a personal computer. And by doing that, they were able to ship it into these countries that are like, no, it's a computer, it's a productivity thing, it's a work thing, and like get around those tariffs. I just think that's really interesting. Of like that's what part of why Sony is called Sony Computer Entertainment, like why their video game part is called Sony Computer Entertainment.
That's
because they're really trying to play it up as a computer.
Yeah, and actually, the biggest, kind of going into that, the biggest thing about the PlayStation 2 was even though it had the backwards compatibility thing going on, it still had no games, like true PlayStation 2 games at launch. And the only successful game that sold was Ridge Racer 5. That's the only one that people bought seemingly at all. But again, people were buying the PlayStation 2 because of its use as a DVD player, a home entertainment center, and then like essentially it's like a personal computer for your home. Yeah. You know, like
this is a really good CD player, DVD player.
Yeah, that's why it's sold, and that's why people bought it. So I mean, in a way, Sony beat Dreamcast not even on games. They kind of changed the way you sell a console by saying it's a home entertainment center.
Yeah.
Which I remember when the Xbox One came out, they really pushed that. They're like, you can connect it to your cable box and you could like talk to Connect and it will like change your channel for you. You don't even have to get up. You can just yell demanding things at your Xbox. It'll be great. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's definitely one of those things where, again, PlayStation beat Sega, but they beat them on an entirely different way. Like it didn't actually beat them with games. They beat them by having a console that could just do way more.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I mean, the Dreamcast with its 56K modem was pretty big, though. Mm-hmm. But I don't really know how much that really went into, like, online gaming.
Yeah. Also, I think around this time it was starting to be discovered how easy it was to pirate games for the Dreamcast, which really just didn't help them out at all.
Oh, yeah. We should do a episode on the history of video game piracy, because I'd be pretty interested to know that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's some good stuff.
I'm going to write that down on the topic list that we keep whenever we say something like that and we want to do it. So,
okay.
So still the release of the PlayStation 2 was enough to damage Sega's reputation. Ira Majiri resigned as the chairman of Sega Enterprises and took a lower post. He essentially demoted himself. And he was replaced with Isao Okawa, who was the chairman of Sega's parent company, CSK. So definitely a loss for Sega. And next week, we're going to talk more about Sega and PlayStation, and now that the consoles are out, what's going on. And we're also going to talk about Microsoft and their announcement of Xbox. So I think this is getting really exciting. The book's almost over. This is the last chapter of the book we're on.
This book is like nearly 20 years old now.
Yeah, so there's still a lot for us to cover. It's just going to be a lot harder for Tyler and I to research it now.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. We're also probably going to have to do a whole thing where we cite our sources and say what's going on. But now that we're going to stop on the what you've been playing segment for a second. We're going to go to that in a bit. But we need to talk business stuff, business announcements, because last week we mentioned the website was down for a bit, and we're back on Podaholics now. That's why this is coming out. It's still hosted on Podaholics. We will be moving over to Libsyn very soon, so we will be independent ourselves. But we got a couple reviews that I wanted to read, and one of them's bad. And it's because of this. I think the person couldn't get the podcast and they didn't see what was going on. So Asynth715 put 1 star. Been getting the show for free, but now we need a password from a site where there's no way to sign up? ? So I get it. I'm sorry, Asynth. I want to apologize to you personally that we didn't have it up, but the website was down. That's the password it was asking for, was the admin password for the website. So I'm glad you didn't have that information, because that would have been weird. That would have gotten awkward for all of us. But then we got another review from CMW0114 that said, very relaxed podcast. This is a very good podcast. The bits of history are interesting, and the nostalgia trips by the cast remind me of my own childhood. Keep up the good work and the relaxed attitude. You got it, CMW. I am so relaxed right now. I am wearing a robe and Crocs and nothing else. It's true, he is.
I can see him on video here, and he actually is. It's like kind of weird.
These are my house Crocs. Oh, no, people are going to believe I'm wearing that now. Okay. But so I'm sorry, Asynth. Thank you, CMW0114. We appreciate the reviews. Hopefully they'll go back and they'll see that there was just an error with the podcast and they'll change their review. But if not, that means we need more people to review and rate the podcast just to, just really bury that review deep down if we can.
No, but it's also good feedback because, the site was broken and that's not.
Yeah. The site was broken.
Good. Yeah.
But I just want everyone to be able to access it. And if there's one thing I can promise you, this show will always be free. We'll never put it behind some sort of paywall. That would be ridiculous. I would never do that. Tyler would never do that. Our podcast producer, Toby the cat, he might do it though. We're not entirely sure.
I locked him out of the room. I can see his paw under the door right now. He's like, let me back in.
Let me back in. I want to put this behind a paywall and make all sorts of money. Toby, all about marketing. Tyler, what have you been playing?
Oh, man. I have been playing Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu. I just started that. It just came out on Friday, so we're recording this on Sunday afternoon. So I put about an hour and a half into this game. It's a pretty good nostalgia trip if you are into the original Pokemon game. So all of the town layout is like all exactly the same. I did notice that there are some differences in the Pokemon that you can catch like early on. I'm playing the Pikachu edition, and early in those first bushes outside of Pallet Town, how there's basically just Pidgey and Rattata there in the normal the old game. There's like a couple other things there. There's an Oddish there. There's I think there's some Spearows, some like different stuff. Also Pidgeys and Rattatas.
Because isn't it sorry to interrupt you, but isn't it a remake of Yellow? So isn't that like blue and red combined? So there's more types of Pokemon to catch?
Kind of. I think that was also true in Yellow, that it was just Pidgeys and Rattata. It's kind of a mix of red and blue, like, because both the Pikachu and the Eevee edition do have like Pokemon that are only found on one version or the other, similar to the old games. But it's sort of one of them doesn't map directly to red or blue. There's kind of a mix there, but it's a lot of those same Pokemon.
So you got Pikachu then, right?
Yeah, I got Pikachu edition.
I am waiting until Christmas, and I want to get a Switch, and I want to get the Eevee version of the game, which means I could give you all those tasty Pokemon you want.
Yeah, that would be great. The big difference, like that you notice right off the bat, is there are no like random battles in the sense that you just walk through the grass and like Pokemon, just like your game is interrupted by Pokemon jumping out at you. You can actually see all the Pokemon on the map, and so you can choose to walk into them or to walk past them. So that's a big difference. Cool. And then once you get into the battles, there are no wild Pokemon battles. Once you run into a Pokemon, it's basically Pokemon Go. You catch Pokemon. And so you basically want to just catch everything you come by, because every Pokemon you catch gives experience to all of the Pokemon in your party.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So it's pretty neat. And then when you fight trainers, which then you have actual Pokemon battle thing going on, like the classic battle system, the Pokemon that fights for you gets extra experience, but then the rest of your Pokemon also get experience, so you don't feel like you have to go back and grind a lot, which I'm not sure if I like it yet or not. I hope the game gets a little bit more challenging, because I did pick up an Oddish in that early area and probably leveled it up a couple of times just by it being in my party when I'm doing other things. And when I got to Brock, the gym leader, I just one-shot both of his things with Oddish. Like this Oddish that I didn't like sit there and grind it out so that I could one shot. Like this was just, I just walked up and pressed absorb twice and won a gym badge, which didn't feel super great, especially because that is generally a pretty hard gym early on in red, blue, and yellow, especially because if you pick Charmander, or if you are playing yellow version and you have a Pikachu, you're not really going to do a whole lot of damage to Brock. You have to go find some other Pokemon to like get fighting type moves or grass type moves or whatever. But so Pikachu learns double kick really early, which is a fighting type move, which is effective against rock. And also you can just pick up an Oddish super easy. And apparently Oddish is OP in this game. So you just absorb everything.
Did you ever think that maybe you're just that good as a Pokemon trainer and that's why you won?
It could be. You know, I really do believe in my Pokemon, and I give them lots of snacks and lots of pets. You can pet Pikachu in this. You can you can dress them up in little outfits and stuff.
I didn't realize how much that mattered to me until I played the 2DS version. I'm just petting my Rowlet every like 3 seconds, just like petting him, make sure he's okay. You know? Oh man, he's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's mainly what I've been spending. I mean, besides the standard, you know, I played a lot of Destiny this week too, but so I'm at Mountain Moon now, kind of making my way through that cave. So what are you doing this week?
I've been playing so much Red Dead. I've been doing the thing where I try to do the white circle side missions first, and then save the yellow circle main story missions to the last second. But boy, oh boy, does it start to feel like I'm just running errands in a video game. That's what it's starting to feel like. And so I might just start just powering through the story because it's already feeling a little bit overwhelming. Yeah. So even though the side quests are great, like this is a side quest you do where you help this dude try to build a robot, and it's super fun. And then there's a side quest where like all these circus animals escape and you got to go catch them. And there's a little twist to that too. But the side quests are really well done, so I want to play them all. But I don't know if I'll get to play them at the end of the game. Like, I don't know how that works. So I kind of feel like I need to beat them now. I wish someone would tell me. Someone would be like, hey, you can do these side missions later on. You know, just explain it to me. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. It's like that subreddit. So, yeah, but it's been pretty fun. I've been still really enjoying it, and I've gotten better at shooting. And I bought a horse, trained it up, dyed its mane silver so it looks like a Dothraki horse, you know, from Game of Thrones. And it's pretty great. Named him Tootnado. He's pretty wonderful. He's a pretty great horse. So I have 2 horses I ride, Tootnado and Mr. Balloon Hands, and those are my 2 main horses. But it's really fun. I'm enjoying the game a lot still. I still also like just riding around and running into something. That feels really cool. Cool. Oh, I found a KKK rally.
Ooh.
And I walked up to it, and these guys lit the cross on fire, and then they lit themselves on fire on accident. So they're all like a bunch of buffoons. And then I shot the leader of the KKK, and my honor points went up. And I was like, oh no, next time I see one of these guys, I should just kill them all, and then I'll get really good honor points. I had no idea. Wow. The honor system's a little wonky in the game, where like you'll kill a gang member, and then you'll loot his body, and then it'll be like, your crime has been reported. And I'm like, but he's a gang member. He's like a bad guy. I shouldn't be punished for that. Also, you'll get attacked in a town, and if you fight back, then you're wanted by the law. There's no Skyrim rules. Where you know how it's like Skyrim rules, if they attack you, it's fair game. You can kill them. Yeah. But in Red Dead, there's no Skyrim rules. So
man,
if you get shot in a town, sometimes you just have to run away unless you want to pay some bounty money. Which I don't know if I really agree with. I think the spirit of the Wild West should live on. If I get shot, I should be able to shoot people back.
I agree.
But it was kind of cool shooting KKK people. That was fun.
Nice.
Yeah, you know, it's a good time. Good times.
Yeah.
The West is there. It's very much so much like stuff. Just like the little blue dots that appear when you're riding along. There's so many of those instances.
Those are like the random quests?
The random encounters. Yeah, they're not even quests. They're really like a lot of the time, sometimes they're just watch this person or help this person. But there's just so many. And I did not expect to see a KKK meeting in the middle of the night. And I was like, what is this thing happening? And they don't ever say they're that because they obviously can't, I think. But it's very much like, you know, that's what is happening.
Yeah.
So But it's been fun. It's a really great game, and I could see myself easily 100 more hours in this game before I put it down for a while. Yeah, it's really great. I can't wait for you and Kelly to finish Red Dead 1 and then get to Red Dead 2, because just like the graphics difference alone and how good it looks too, you'll just be like, oof, ooh, it looks so pretty. Yeah. But it's been fun.
Good.
So yeah, next week we are going to talk about Xbox, as I said before, and Microsoft. Bill Gates. I remember Bill Gates' big announcement. Actually, we're going to talk about that first. That's how it opens. And then after that, we're going to kind of be on our own.
Yeah.
Which I'm actually really excited for. I do think we should probably do, when we're done with the Xbox, the Dreamcast, and the PlayStation 2 fully, we'll probably do another one of those top 10 games for each console episodes, because I like doing those to kind of explain, go a little more in depth and see what kind of games people were playing at the time.
Yep.
But then after that, I think we should just go by console, you know?
Yep.
Just do it up. And then when we get to the end and we get to present day, we'll hear Tyler's thoughts in the future. And then we'll get to do some really cool, like very specific things, like a history of Metal Gear Solid, or a history of Pokemon, or history of piracy in video games, which I think would be cool.
Yeah, this will be fun.
I'm stoked. So thank you all so much for bearing with us during our time of technical difficulty. It means the world to us. And as always, you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can add us on Twitter at @mecoletta or at SneakerElf, ELPH. That's Tyler's name. You can rate and review and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Google Play. You are the best. That's all I have to say about you, listener. You're the best. Tyler. Bye.
Burning Rangers.
This has been a Podaholics Comedy Network presentation. Podaholics.com